Hey, Alisha here. Just letting you know that there is a mention of suicide in this episode.
Having one person who's highly educated sat in a room with 7 professors doesn't mean you're really co-producing your research. We want to really get it in a meaningful way across health research.
Welcome to When Science Finds a Way, a podcast about the science changing the world. I'm Alisha Wainwright, and on this series, I'm meeting with people with hands-on experience of our greatest health challenges, as well as the scientists and researchers working to make a difference. And on this episode, we'll be hearing about what happens when the people with lived experience of an issue are the scientists working in the field.
We're autistic through and through on this project, which I think is really, really unusual. I don't know of another comparably sized project.
My guest today is Dr. Aimee Grant from the University of Swansea in Wales, UK. Aimee specialized in pregnancy and infant feeding before she was diagnosed as autistic in 2019. She's since decided to combine her research into maternity services with the study of autistic adults. This has led to an ambitious research project called Autism from Menstruation to Menopause, which aims to understand what healthcare is like for autistic women and people assigned female at birth throughout their whole lives. The need for this is pressing. As you'll hear, the health disparities for autistic people are huge. And this is a project that isn't just ambitious in its scope, but also in its methodology. The entire team is neurodivergent, and Aimee has adopted a participatory research approach that puts the autistic community on a level playing field with the scientists. The project isn't only aiming to change how healthcare professionals respond to autistic individuals, but also how the research is carried out in the first place. Aimee, welcome to When Science Finds a Way.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aimee, I just want to kick off with a really simple question, straightforward, for those who may not know, what is autism?
So autism is a neurodevelopmental difference. So that means it's something that you're either born with or you're not. So even if some people are diagnosed in adulthood, they will have been autistic their whole life. And it's a difference that means that autistic people often communicate differently to non-autistic people. So they might be a bit more direct. They might be a bit more literal in terms of interpretation. And we can have differences in how we perceive the sensory environment around us as well. But the key thing that I would emphasize here is that it's a difference. It's not a deficit or a disorder. And, some people identify with a label of disability, but not all autistic people will identify with being disabled themselves.
For those listening who aren't familiar with the language you're using around this project, what do we mean when we say women and people assigned female at birth, and why is this language important to the research team and to the project?
So before I applied for this funding, I did a community consultation and using just the word women actually didn't apply to everybody in the autistic community. So we know probably about a fifth of autistic people wouldn't identify with the term women. So they'd be non-binary or trans or have some other gender identity. And it came through really clearly that we shouldn't just say women, we should say women and people assigned female at birth, just so that everybody in the community feels included in our research.
What percentage of autistic people are female or assigned female at birth, and what is the average age of diagnosis?
Until a few years ago, you were seeing things cited regularly that around 1 in 4 autistic people were women or assigned female at birth. But actually now it's looking more like there isn't any credible evidence for a gender split and that we would expect it to be roughly equal. We have a lot of different reasons for why we had lower rates of women and people assigned female at birth being diagnosed previously. So, just the way that girls are socialized, they're taught to be nice, they're taught to be more compliant. And that means that actually autistic girls might do something called masking more than boys. And that's where you really carefully study the things that other people are being praised for doing, or you're paying attention to the things that you're not getting a positive response from. And you start only doing the things that receive a positive response. And that then means when you go and try and get diagnosed later in life, you're probably masking some of your autistic traits. So even then, you might not get a diagnosis if you are autistic.
So tell me more about how the idea for this research came about and why you wanted to do it.
All of my research is really community-led, and this research project wasn't originally supposed to be the entire life course. It was supposed to be just around the maternity period, and that's what I've been doing, for a decade before I started this project. But when I asked the community about my plans, and I only asked autistic people who'd given birth, they came out and they said, but what about endometriosis? What about the menopause? What about, smear
There's so much
tests?
more. Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the project then just got much bigger to kind of cover all of the things that are impacting autistic women and other people assigned female at birth throughout their whole life course.
And why is that so important?
I think it's really been missed from the research agenda. So there isn't loads of research on autistic people's maternity experiences, probably about a dozen studies. But actually, when we think about periods or contraception and these sorts of things, we're down to a handful of studies, and there's very little in terms of things like period pain, which can have a really big impact on quality of life.
So what health disparities do we currently see for autistic people?
There are so many, it would almost be easier to say, what don't we see? So I think in terms of physical health, on all of the different scales that I've seen autistic people have worse physical health, our mental health is worse. And that means, we have a suicide rate almost 9 times that of non-autistic people.
Wow.
We also have really big disparities in terms of life, in terms of how long people live. So these are huge health disparities.
I'm also kind of puzzled by the lack of research when you consider that disparity. So do you feel like when you saw that and you saw the numbers, it kind of propelled you to want to investigate this further?
The reason I started looking into autism at all as a research topic was I'd had my own really negative experience of an ectopic pregnancy and the care that I received for that during COVID lockdown, which might have been the worst possible time.
Oh, my.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I started a new job at Swansea University, and I was in an infant feeding research centre, and my remit was to do any infant feeding research. And I thought I'd have a look and see what autistic people's breastfeeding experiences were like. And there were just some extra difficulties there, but also a lot of really strongly wanting to breastfeed, but not getting the support that they wanted from health professionals. And actually through the literature, we see that across all different forms of healthcare, that there are these barriers to getting equitable care. So I was like, right, absolutely, let's roll up my sleeves and let's see what I can do about this.
Oh, amazing. Well, during our conversation, we're going to hear from 3 members of the Community Council, which plays a critical role in this research project. The council, which we'll hear more about later, is made up of 11 members representing a diverse range of voices and intersections from the autistic community. Some of their reasons for wanting to take part in the project also gave us an insight into why it's needed. Let's hear from them now.
I'm Monique. I am one of the community leaders on the Autistic Community Council. The reason why I wanted to take part in the project was because I know how difficult it is for autistic women and those assigned female at birth to actually get information. I think in neurotypical settings, these are things that are passed on through peer groups and family networks, and quite often that seems to be lacking for autistic people. As they grow, they don't necessarily have these female networks that give them this information. And also because we're quite literal, we might take a piece of information like, oh, well, your periods are meant to be painful, and then not realise what level of pain is actually acceptable. We tend to speak differently. We report pain differently. We tend to have very different sensory perceptions. And most of the time, we're just not believed. I couldn't breastfeed. I was really struggling. The healthcare visitors and people, they just didn't seem to have the understanding. So a lot of things are just brushed off as, oh, well, that's normal. Or, oh, well, you just have to deal with it. It's like, it's causing me so much pain. How could I possibly be told to just deal with it?
So my name is Hazel. I'm the member of the Council for this project. I wanted to take part of this project because it addresses a deeply overlooked area of the intersectionality, like autism, gender, ethnicity. I'm a Chinese myself. I'm a Malaysian Chinese. And then the menopause. In the Chinese community, autism is often stigmatized, and discussion about health and menopause is a taboo. Women's period has always been seen as something, it's like a dirty blood. So we don't talk about it a lot. So there's a lot of stigma. So that means that autistic Chinese women, we face incredibly, unique kind of barriers in seeking support. So this project really feels like a step forward, amplifying the voices like mine and others to ensure the research reflect our lived experience and realities.
My name is Abigail. I am one of the community counsellors. I think there's a lot of really heavily swayed scientific research for autistic men and people assigned male at birth. And that kind of leaves women and co high and dry in terms of diagnosis and treatment and care and all of these sorts of things that we tend to be either really late diagnosed, misdiagnosed. It just presents with a lot of problems. So having these research opportunities is really, really important.
That was Abigail, Monique, and Hazel, 3 members of the Community Council who we're going to be hearing from throughout the episode. Aimee, it's great to hear how enthusiastic they are about the project, but it's also quite eye-opening to hear about some of the challenges autistic people and the autistic community can face. What stood out to you there?
I think there were 2 things that really stood out. So first of all, that unmet need, the unheard voices, and also the quality of life issues that, so much autism research historically has been people in labs with mice, when that has nothing to do with our quality of life. It doesn't help us access a GP appointment when we have a worrying symptom. So I think they're bringing out a lot of the same reasons that influenced me to do the study.
You know what I was thinking of too in hearing them speak was just this sort of passed down communication, just even, within your peer community or within your family. But if you have this extra branch, this intersectionality of autism, it makes it really hard to get that sort of feedback from your community. It's kind of challenging to be able to figure out how to connect and understand what's acceptable and what's not.
Definitely. And it's something that I'm seeing. So I'm currently reviewing the evidence on autism and the menopause. And, not having those peer networks is a real issue coming up, but also that there isn't tailored information. So the menopause isn't going to be the same for an autistic person compared to a non-autistic person. So having an autistic peer network around you is something people are saying is really important.
So tell me a bit more about the design of the research study. It's a longitudinal study. Can you explain what that means and what exactly you're doing?
Yeah, so longitudinal is a fancy word for saying that we'll talk to the same people multiple times. And the plan for this study is we'll have 100 autistic people and we will speak to them up to 10 times each. And that will be over the course of about 5 years. So we'll be doing interviews with people and we'll do them in whichever format works best for them. So some people might choose to have their interview in real time, but instead of speaking, they might choose to type their answers. Other people might want some more time, so they might send WhatsApp voice notes backwards and forwards over a week or so. And I'm just hoping that by having this kind of time to build up a relationship with the researcher, that we'll be there when big issues are happening in people's lives. So one of our participants has got pregnant. So they weren't pregnant at the beginning, and now we're going to see them a couple of times while they're pregnant. And then again, we'll see them when they've given birth, and also just difficult GP appointments or hospital appointments. When it's still fresh in people's minds, we're going to get much more information than if you just ask people to reflect back on something that had happened previously. And we're giving people the opportunity to reach out to their researcher and say, like, this thing happened to me. So either they can send a bit of extra information or they can have their next interview sooner. So we're being really flexible to try and capture that information.
And the whole research team on this project, so you and your 4 research assistants, is autistic. How unusual is that, and why is that so important?
We don't have great evidence about who is doing autism research because people don't often write it in their papers if they were or weren't autistic. But my hunch is that most of the big autism studies are being done by people who aren't autistic. I haven't heard of another study like mine where there's me leading it who's autistic, and then all of the researchers are autistic. And then we've got a community council of lay autistic people as well. So we're autistic through and through on this project, which I think is really, really unusual. I don't know of another comparably sized project.
Well, even just in your brief description of how you're actually facilitating the questions, the fact that you can cater to each participant to fit their needs so that you're getting the most authentic answers you can get from the participants, that's something that I would imagine came from just your own lived experience and knowing what would work best.
Yeah, definitely. It has been seen in some other autism interview studies where they offer people the choice. But we've also kind of gone another step further into trying to make it a really comfortable experience for our participants. So they want to stay in the study. So all of our participants had like an onboarding conversation before they did their first interview, where they talked about things that would make it more comfortable for them to take part, anything they definitely didn't want to talk about or happen. We've sent everybody information about the things we'd like to talk about in advance. So like periods, contraception, going to see a health professional, these sorts of things.
Not what you had for breakfast.
Absolutely. And we're giving people some templates where they can create some notes and things for things they want to talk about in the interview. So, you know, it's different to the standard interview you often get on a health topic, which is very much question, answer. Right. We're being led off into all sorts of wonderful tangents, but they're coming back to some really important experiences.
So tell me a bit more about the Community Council. Who are they and what role do they play in the project?
So the Community Council are just brilliant. I'm so fortunate to have them. I had 2 autistic community leaders involved, and they brought another 2 autistic community leaders with them who had a more kind of diverse range of backgrounds and experience.
When you say community leaders, does that mean like within your local community?
I would say they're known across the whole of the UK, at least, and potentially internationally as well. And the autism community mostly hangs out online. You'll find quite a lot of us would rather stay at home than have to go out. So, so we've got quite a few people based in Wales on the Community Council. We do have somebody from England because it was really important to me. We had somebody non-speaking on the Community Council because, you know, there are a lot of autistic people who find speaking difficult in difficult situations, but there are some who just don't speak at all or speak very little. So we're generally based in Wales, but my community leaders really their kind of activism will be felt internationally as well as in the UK. And so then it took us probably about 5 months of working together to then accessibly recruit for a broad range of more lay autistic people. So often in health research, you might have a patient representative, but often they might have a master's degree. They might be doing something very similar for their day job. And I didn't only want to have those people. I wanted people more like the community who we're going to be trying to create a toolkit to support.
Mm-hmm. So how unique is this model of participatory research, and where did you draw inspiration from?
So it's definitely not unique. I've got an absolutely amazing advisor, Professor Christina Nicoladis, who's based at Portland State University in America. And she has the Aspire group, who have been doing this model of participatory research for almost 20 years now. Oh, wow. So having her support has been invaluable to kind of use this model in the UK, and also to kind of, try to really push it to make it as accessible as possible. But in terms of large autism projects, there really aren't very many who are taking decisions with the community. Mm-hmm. So my council make all of the big decisions with me for the project, and they're also going to be authors on the work that we do, which means making that process accessible to people, including those who have learning disabilities.
So Abigail, Monique, and Hazel told us a bit more about what the experience of being part of the Community Council has been like to date. Let's hear from them again.
Being part of the Community Council for this research project is like the best meeting you could ever have. If you're socially awkward or you feel like you don't fit in, this is the meeting that you actually kind of want to go to.
The first thing we did was establish ground rules so that we could say, it is okay if you forget things. It is okay if we're halfway through the agenda and someone goes, oh, I've only just remembered about point 1. Can we talk about that? All of these things are absolutely fine because it's the way we interact. So there's no hostility, there's no, telling people off for talking out of turn or anything like that. It's very inclusive.
The experience has been really empowering and enlightening and inspiring. Everyone is autistic and is woman, and that really creates a safe and validating place for us to share our perspective. And nobody would dismiss me, or, nobody would dismiss each other. Everyone's insight has been deeply valued and respected. So it feels like we are truly shaping a research into a meaningful way.
I actually take part in quite a few groups, from organisations, being a trustee, being on different boards. So I know how they usually function. And, instantly when I joined the Community Council at Swansea, I could feel the difference because we weren't there as tokens. The group is fundamentally all kind of seen as equals in a way. So Aimee will quite often send us huge reams of work that's being done, artwork, questionnaires, all kinds of stuff. We are fundamentally designing the project as a group as we go forward.
The real coming together is when we talk about our own experiences as autistic people, lived in experiences. And it's sort of like this crescendo of, yeah, I've been there. That's happened to me. And it's kind of heartbreaking because a lot of it's really negative. And you see how people have just been absolutely steamrolled over by the healthcare system. And so many people in the meeting relate to it. And it is heartbreaking, but it just shows you why this needs to be done. I feel really heard when I talk about my ideas and opinions and how things make me feel and what I think needs to happen. And even if we disagree with each other, it's always this nice mediatory middle ground of this is how we're going to approach it. This is what people are voting for. And it's really affirming.
I've been able to co-author papers, which has been really exciting for me because as someone who wasn't able to complete their masters, academia is very difficult for me. So for me, it's an amazing project. And it's given me a lot of opportunity and things that I'm proud of. I think as a community, we're rightfully wary about research projects, because traditionally it's been non-autistic people that have spoken to our carers and said, what is the problem with your kids, as opposed to actually asking us as autistic people, what are your barriers? What would you like us to tackle through this research? And I think this is why Aimee's project is so innovative, because it's us that are saying, well, we'd like more support in these areas and we'd like better understanding in these areas. And it really does come down to inclusion. Aimee's hit the nail on the head and has been able to make something that actually works the way we all understood co-production to be. And I just think that other people need to start emulating it.
Aimee, you have something really special going on here. I loved hearing about the group's bonding experience and how they felt so safe just to be themselves. I mean, what was it like witnessing the group's formation?
I think I probably seem like a swan. I'm floating along on the surface and my legs are going like mad under the water. But I mean, it's so nice hearing those things. And, we're doing an evaluation every year because we want to then share best practice. Because as Monique says, we want to make other autism research more like this. We want to make other co-production more like this, where, it might take more time. It probably takes, up to 2 days of my week to do this and to do it this well. But that just means other people need to build in that cost into their projects, into their applications.
Mm-hmm. And it also seems critical that you're coming from the perspective of how can we support people better, as opposed to how do we fix this? How integral is that to the research?
I think that's really important, and it's kind of an ethos that we've built all together. So we did write a paper about what it was like forming this initial council of 4 and coming up with what we called our standard reminders. So they're not rules, but it's like it's okay to forget things. Something spurred them early on. So one of our council members had forgotten to return after the break. And then they'd got very nervous when they'd realised they hadn't come back, and it was now 15 minutes instead of 10, that they then felt too scared to come back because they'd had negative reactions in the past. And that's how we decided we needed these reminders. They came from the bottom up. It wasn't my idea. And they've kind of grown over time. So anytime there's like an issue or something someone's worried about, then we'll add in something. It's like reassurance rather than rules.
Right. How representative and inclusive do you think the community council is? Are you still recruiting members, and are there any intersections that could be better represented?
So our community council, I think, is probably a really good community council in terms of the representation we've got. So we have some people who have high support needs. We do have some variation there in terms of ethnicity, but I feel like we could always be doing more, to only have one person who's non-speaking when that's such an important part of the autistic community. We only have 2 people who have learning disabilities when about a third of the autistic community have them. So, I'd say we're doing a lot better than most studies, but we're still not at an optimal level.
You mentioned papers which have been co-authored around the community council's formation. I know the results of the study itself are years off, but you are also about to publish some systematic reviews. So you're looking through all the papers and the evidence that's already out there. Can you tell me a bit more about that and what these have shown you so far?
Yes, absolutely. I've got 2 of my brilliant researchers leading on reviews. So Rebecca Ellis is leading our reviews on periods. And actually, we haven't found very much evidence there, but it shows us where the gaps are. And then by contrast, another one of my brilliant researchers, Harriet Axby, is leading our review on autism and puberty. And we found 61 papers, which is enormous for a systematic review.
Wow.
It's really, really big. I apologize to her quite a lot for how big her review is. But a lot of them aren't doing research that's going to have any kind of positive impact on the life of autistic teens. There's a lot of stuff about kind of measuring things, but not what's making people happy, what's making it easier for people to cope with going through puberty. And then lastly, I mentioned at the beginning that I've been looking at the menopause experiences, and there we're just finding such a massive gap when it comes to knowledge.
Well, I guess that leads nicely into the research that you've been conducting, as I assume you are hoping to fill in some of those gaps. What impact do you hope your study will have?
So what we're doing at the moment is we're getting the 100 autistic people in the study to tell us everything that's going on with their reproductive health. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to be doing over the next kind of 4 or 5 years is we're going to be pulling this together into what the key gaps in knowledge are, you know, how we can fill those. We couldn't find a single paper that talked about autistic people and contraception. But we know that during puberty and the menopause and during pregnancy, things can be harder because we've got hormonal changes. And with a lot of hormonal or contraception being hormonal, we might realistically expect there to be some differences there. So, you know, we're going to be trying to look at the things that are going to make a difference in people's lives. We'll write papers about them. And then in the last 2 years of the study, so around 2029 and 2030, we're then going to create a toolkit. We're hoping there'll be something that will make it easier to get through reproductive health changes, maybe something about how to make healthcare more accessible, which might be targeted at health professionals as well as at autistic people. Mm-hmm. So there will be something by the end of the study that I really hope is ticking that quality of life box.
So we asked Monique, Hazel, and Abigail what they'd like healthcare professionals and policymakers to know about the autistic experience. Here are their responses.
I think the one thing I'd like society to know about autistic women and others assigned female at birth is gaslighting. Unintentional gaslighting. When we say things like, oh, it's too bright, the most common answer we get is, no, it isn't. It's fine for everyone else. And it makes us over time question our own experience. And I think that for doctors to understand that our experience is fundamentally different and to be able to give us that space to explain what those differences are and to be believed.
I'm hoping like the GP, the health workers, they can be a bit more open-minded and let us feel accepting, feel accepting that our voice is heard and valued. Because often a lot of health workers, they are really under a lot of pressure. So a lot of them are quite impatient, put it this way. And they are lack of capacity to listen, I feel. So it's important they value the autistic woman's voice.
When you say you're autistic, it's almost like you become a second-class citizen in a way, or you de-age to about 5 in some people's eyes. And it might not be a conscious decision. It might be a really deep back in that noggin little switch. Almost when someone tells you they've done something and you've been friends with them for years, but suddenly you see them differently. That is what I think happens in the minds of health professionals, and I've seen it happen. And I think it's really, really important to just push past that feeling that you get, to really try and see us as people. See me as a 27-year-old woman that has lived a life. I have thoughts, opinions. I've got some level of intelligence. So treat me that way.
I think the one thing that policymakers really need to do is start paying attention to the research. We have a lot more autistic researchers now doing PhDs, doing studies that we want done. we need policymakers to actually start paying attention to those studies, to start acting on them and putting implementations in that actually are wanted by the autistic community.
Wow. So many different insights there, but all drawn together by a need to listen to the autistic community more and a diverse representation of that community. How will the views of the Community Council be integrated into the output of the study?
So the council will be involved in writing all of the papers from the study. So we'll probably split into smaller groups. So for each paper, maybe 3 or 4 people. So we've got enough time to provide that one-to-one support where it's needed for people to make a meaningful contribution. But they will be involved in interpreting all of our analysis. They'll be involved in thinking about what the recommendations are. I mean, I think it's just brilliant there that, you know, independently, 3 of the council members have all turned this around to primary healthcare. You know, we need to make primary healthcare more accessible. And those sorts of things will come through in all of our outputs.
And how has your work to date had an impact on healthcare for autistic people?
So a few years ago, I was going to make about 7 short animations around the maternity journey for autistic people. And again, I got the autistic community involved and we ended up with 114 short videos. So,
I'm just imagining the image of you, the swan just cruising and then your little feet underneath. Like, you're really working.
Absolutely. I've probably got a bit of a problem with saying no. But yeah, instead of the animations, we are able to direct that money to autistic maternity professionals, so like midwives and occupational therapists, and autistic parents who made us these short videos. And I know those are being used in a few different NHS trusts in the UK. I've started being invited into some kind of policy circles, but I think I've got a long way to go in terms of making an impact on an autistic person going to their GP because they're having side effects from the contraceptive pill. I think we're 10 years away from me having any impact on that, but I'll keep on chipping away a little bit at a time.
Please do. And I'm excited to see how it unfolds. How can we make sure that recommendations from research projects like yours actually translate into real world outcomes?
One of the big barriers to good quality healthcare for autistic people is staff being really busy. And I think things like double length appointment times can make a really big impact on being able to provide more accessible care to autistic people. But that needs a commitment. Really, it is going to be, policymakers getting this on their agenda and then more funding available to make it happen in the real world.
And what do you hope the wider research community will learn from this project?
I'd really like other studies, and not just in autism, but in all areas, to take this community council model. And it's not mine, you know, it is very much building on a long tradition of participatory research methods. But I'd like to see it happening more. You know, having one person who's highly educated sat in a room with 7 professors doesn't mean you're really co-producing your research. We want to really get it in a meaningful way across health research.
And what challenges remain for autism research, and where does the field need to go next?
So I think one of the biggest challenges for autism research is that a large group of autism researchers and a lot of autism funding is directed to kind of biological research, which is looking to find a genetic cause so then they can find a cure.
Right.
And actually that's just coming from the point of view that autism is bad, rather than thinking actually autistic people are a real benefit for society. And actually, if we can think about how we can make school and healthcare and those sorts of things more accessible, autistic people are just going to flourish and that will enrich society. So I think we need to move away from a deficit-based medical model of autism into a social model of autism and just bring the community in. And I think the autistic community would be skeptically open and optimistic if people who've done really deficit research in the past started moving into more positive spaces.
It's never too late to make an improvement.
Absolutely.
And finally, there may be people listening to this who can relate to some of the experiences we've discussed, but perhaps they've never received a formal diagnosis of autism. Are there any resources you would recommend for anyone who might want to find out more?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I would say, if you think you're autistic, there is a really good chance that you are. And you know, I would get involved in social media spaces for autistic people. And I would say to aim for autism spaces that are run by autistic people. So the organisation Autistic UK are partners on this study. They've got a website. If you're a parent yourself, Autistic Parents UK are run by autistic parents. They're really neurodiversity affirming. And yeah, come follow my study on social media. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. You can find me on Blue Sky. And let me know. I can nudge you in the right direction if there's something specific you're looking to find.
Oh, that's such a generous offer for our listeners. Thank you so much. I feel like I learned so much and also have a really reaffirming sense of inclusivity in research is a strength. And the more people understand that and use that in their research projects, the better the outcomes will be for everyone. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, Aimee.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching this episode of When Science Finds a Way. And thanks to my guest, Dr. Aimee Grant, and Community Council members Hazel, Monique, and Abigail. This is such a great example of the value of including people who are directly impacted by an issue in research. I mean, giving council members the chance to co-author papers, what a way to give someone the sense of ownership to see their name on a published paper. And so well-deserved, too, as their input is clearly making the research better. I'm really curious to see how this project pans out and the impact that it might have. I did put in my calendar to give Aimee a call in 2035 to find out. When Science Finds a Way is brought to you by Wellcome, a charitable foundation that supports the global scientific community, working to build a healthier future for everyone. If you visit wellcome.org/podcast, that's welcome with 2 L's, you'll find transcripts from the show and a whole host of information about the urgent health challenges Wellcome is tackling. And remember to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube for more episodes of the podcast. All right, see you next time.